are respected for that diversity, not forced into the majority. And I think it's quite funny that last time I debated in Singapore, they were saying that we should have racial profiling. This time they're saying that we should eradicate these indigenous languages, right? But I'm going to go on to say that I'm extremely proud to propose this motion today as well. I have 3 questions on the bottom before going on to my 4th argument about how we're going to empower the majority. The first question, is there a necessity for protecting these languages? Today, Singapore came up here and said that, we do acknowledge the importance of these indigenous languages, but we're just going to protect it through museums and documents, right? First of all, Mr. Speaker, we think that it's extremely hard to preserve these indigenous endangered languages through documents or museums, because in the many cases, they don't really have these much documents or cultural objects to actually make them maintained and preserved. But secondly, we think that it's quite wishy-washy in Singapore's stance there, that in fact they say it's so important, but we shouldn't have it at schools. When we think that schools is a very important mechanism of education, it starts from the grassroots level, not just from symbolic action of having some museums and documents, which is not going to stand and not going to be preserved in the long run. But let's say that actually those indigenous languages only have 1% of people speaking, that's like, no, that's significant, right? Mr. Speaker, the justification of even protecting these 1% people and not protecting those indigenous languages in which like 1 or 2 people speak, the difference comes here, is that when the government can save these languages by building a school and by having these institutions, then it's their moral obligation, then it's their incentive to actually build these schools and help these languages. But when there's only 1 or 2 people speaking that language, and it's practically hard to actually save these languages, even by having government to work, then we don't see that we have to protect those languages as well. We think it's unfortunate, we think that doesn't happen in their stance, as though it's not a unique harm. We think that that justification even comes in the fact, so like protecting endangered animals. We don't protect all endangered animals, we protect endangered animals that we see that there's a possibility for when there's institutional help to actually save this. And by the way, we're protecting indigenous animals, why shouldn't we protect indigenous languages? But secondly, Mr. Speaker, they talked about this question about whether the government should be, and the first question, they talked about social antagonism, right? This is the second argument about how there's going to be social backlash. Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, we fundamentally challenge their premise that we have to accept people through making them as the same as us. We think that even though you're different, diversity can also be a means of accepting people. They have to prove to us why when we force people to speak all the same language, that's true acceptance. We don't think that's true acceptance. We don't think that apartheid, and we don't think like forcing people to do something is true acceptance. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, we think that those problems of social antagonism and these people being systematically secluded is just in their status quo, and they don't do anything to solve that issue. But going on to the second question, why should it be the government? They said a very short rebuttal to this by saying that the resources aren't there, right? I'm going to take you in a second, sir. Alright, I'll just take it right now.
Madam, if you really wanted to make up for the misdeeds of the government in the past, then focus on increasing the socio-economic prospect of indigenous minorities, which you don't do when you only teach their language.
You know what? What do you do in the first place when these people are systematically secluded? But secondly, we think that the reason why it's our analysis about protecting these people because the government is persecuted is because we're proving that these languages are not just disappearing because they don't have functional value. Many of the cases it's because of systematic persecution by the government, and that's one other reason, unique reason why the government has to do it. But then they talked about how there's no resources, right? First of all, we think that using schools to actually preserve these languages is the best way that we can use these resources. Not having these buildings, huge buildings like museums, and have these document preservation, right? We think that schools, the cycle of teaching is the true education that's going to last for the long term. That's why it's the most efficient usage of resources. But secondly, we think that those old people they talk about, they're not really employed in many cases. We can just recruit them as speaker for no big resources. And we think that using those people and actually making them integrate in the society, giving them a job to teach these children is the best way to use the resources that is not being used in the current status quo. The last question, do we have to educate these students through schools? They talked about in their first example why these languages should only have functional skills, right? And then when you teach these students indigenous language, it's not going to make them like, prepare for their future challenges. First of all, they completely ignored our cultural value of the languages, the identities, values of these languages. They only talked about functional values. We don't think that language is just about functional communication. But secondly, Mr. Speaker, we think that the empowerment doesn't just happen from speaking the majority language. We think that in the case of America, there's plenty of people that speak English well. There's many people who speak English well that are unemployed, right? We think that social empowerment comes from the subject skills, from the knowledge that we learn in school, but these students are not being able to learn those skills because of the language barrier. I'm going to explain them more in my third argument, so I think you should be patient ladies and gentlemen, if that's okay. So we think that the third rebuttal towards this is that it's a choice that these people are making. If they think that they're disadvantaged from the fact that they're not allowed to learn in their indigenous language, then we give them an institution to actually go to. So we don't think that the government has the right to say that because they want you to be, like for your future challenges, we're going to force you to learn a single language. I don't think the government does have the right to do that in the first place, and it's their burden to prove why the government has that right. Before I go on to my substantive, I'll take this.
We aren't forcing people to learn a single language. We just don't think government funds should be spent on facilitating them too.
You know what? I think it's forcing when you mandate these children to go to a school that predominantly teaches in English, doesn't use any resources in the indigenous languages, and actually ignores these endangered indigenous languages in the government level and the grassroots level. Going on to the last argument of team opposition side, it's very strong. I ask you to listen carefully. The fourth argument is that how we empower the minorities. Mr. Speaker, we think that in status quo, the people using endangered indigenous languages are systematically secluded and disenfranchised from their communities. Why? Because no matter how the government tries to force these people to learn the majority language or their blending into the society, these people are inherently in a harder position to learn that language because of two reasons. The first reason is because there's a huge difference in the exposure time. Because in contrast to the other children who learn English, the majority language, both at home and school, these indigenous people don't learn that language, the majority language, at their home or in their indigenous communities. So they're in an inherently harder position to learn the majority language. But secondly, we see that they have less willingness to learn the majority language because they think that they're different from the majority in many ways. And they're facing the social stigma. They think that no matter how hard they try, they don't really have the willingness to learn the majority language. So we think that that's why the dropout rate for these people are unproportionate in the cases of America and Canada. So we think that these people are what we're tremendously interested in, those that have less willingness and chance to learn English in the first place. And we think that's better to empower them by actually teaching their indigenous languages for three reasons. The first reason is because you're removing that barrier of language and you're making it easier to learn the other skills, the social skills, the specific subject knowledge that would otherwise be hard to learn because of that language barrier. But the second reason is that we're giving them a unique advantage. This cultural heritage and knowing a language that has this immense cultural value is in fact a unique advantage to these people, and we think that unique advantage is what's really important in the competitive society of the 21st century. But thirdly, we think that this identity crisis is largely solved under our model, and these people are integrating society more. Well,